And I just want to begin by thanking our colleague here, Mr. Hurd from Texas, for his work here on behalf of the safety and security of the American people. He's a former CIA undercover officer, and as a result of that, I think he had some unique insights here in moving this legislation. And now the name of this act is Enhancing Overseas Traveler Vetting Act. And I would also like to thank one other, and that's the Homeland Security Chairman, Mr. McCall. He's also on our committee that Mr. Sherman and I serve on. But I thank him for his leadership on the bipartisan task force on combating terrorists and foreign fighter travel. And that task force made recommendations with the help of Mr. Hurd and led to the introduction of this important piece of legislation. And it was passed out of the committee I chair, the Foreign Affairs Committee, back in February. And I also just wanted to recognize Mr. Elliott Engel and Mr. Sherman for their assistance as well, their support on this. And I think the reason it has such resonance with the members here on the House is because the global threat of terrorism has never been as high today. And in just the last 12 months, we have seen terrorists strike in my home state of California. We've seen it in France and Belgium, Turkey, India, Tunisia, where I just was a few days ago, the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Iraq. We were up in Erbil and in Baghdad. And I've got to tell you, this is a situation that is compounding. No country is immune. And this radical ideology that is now on the Internet, a virtual caliphate on the Internet, we should call it, it knows no boundaries. It's pulling individuals from all over the globe. It is radicalizing them and increasingly doing it without them even having to leave their neighborhood. I just returned, as I mentioned, from Iraq and Tunisia and Jordan, and I heard firsthand there about the foreign fighter threat. You've got 35,000 foreigners right now. 3,600 of them are from Europe. They're actually from a total of 120 countries. They have traveled to the Middle East to join ISIS. Many of these fighters are now looking to return to their homes, back in Brussels, back in Paris, in the capitals of Europe, even here in the United States. Bazi was the name of a young girl who testified before our committee. Mr. Sherman and I remember some of the things she told us. She was taken captive by an American who had been recruited over the Internet to join ISIS. She became his concubine, and he felt compelled to tell her this was part of his ideology. He had converted to this. And as a result of her being an apostate, she had to go through what other Yazidis and Christians and other faiths had to go through, which was to submit to him and to the well of his particular code. And eventually she got loose. She got free of him and told us that tale of how ultimately she lost every male in the village, all her brothers, how her sisters are now concubines, and that these were foreign fighters, many of them. And that's why information sharing between countries is more critical now than ever, because this thing is everywhere now. The bipartisan task force's report highlighted the lack of any comprehensive global database of foreign fighters and suspected terrorists. And in its absence, the U.S. and other countries rely on a patchwork system for exchanging extremist identities, which is weak and increases the odds that foreign fighters and suspected terrorists will be able to cross borders undetected. So this bill, thanks to Mr. Hurd's expertise, will authorize the secretaries of the Department of State and Homeland Security, the secretaries of those departments, to develop open source software platforms to vet travelers against terrorists' watch lists and against law enforcement databases. And it permits the open source software shared with foreign governments and with multilateral organizations for police purposes like Interpol. And this bill reflects the recommendations made by, as I said, our colleagues on the task force, which we have worked together on. And I thank Mr. Hurd and Chairman McCall for their leadership working to make our nation safer and against terrorist threats. And I reserve